When we have determined a maximum tolerable downtime for our critical systems, we would then look at which safeguards can we put in place to mitigate and recover from disasters. And one of the things we could consider is disaster recovery sites. And they come in a couple of different flavors that I would know for the exam. A redundant site. Makes sense? It is identical to our production site. It has real-time copies of our data. It can either be set up to fail over if there is a disaster, something happens, we switch automatically traffic over to the redundant site, or we can choose to use it as an active-active pair. We use load balancing and we send traffic both to the primary and the redundant site. If anything happens in either of them, traffic just flows to the other site. Since the site is identical, we would have exactly the same power requirements, HVAC requirements, we would have the raised floors, the generators, the UPSs, the same hardware specs on everything. Now we may choose to only house critical applications there, but in most cases, redundant means identical. This is, because it is identical, also the most expensive type. And our end users, if something happens to either of the sites, should never notice. And it is important with all the disaster recovery sites that they are geographically distant. I have worked in places where the primary and the secondary data center were within half a mile of each other. If something bad happens, it is likely to affect both data centers. So as part of what we did while I was there, we started to migrate the secondary data center 50 miles away. Still not a lot, but it's much better. If a disaster struck, it is much less likely to affect both data centers. A hot site is similar to the redundant site, but it only houses our critical applications and systems. These systems would most often be lower spec systems. Remember the MOR? This is where we would use those. It is still a full data center, but the footprint is much smaller. We still have the redundant UPSs, HVACs, internet service providers, generators, everything we have in a regular data center. It's just smaller. And we would have to fail the traffic over manually, but this will take an hour or less. And a hot site is required to have near or real-time copies of our data. Remember earlier when I said every time there's a change, we change that change to an offsite facility. This is it. And luckily with the different disaster recovery sites, they make sense. Redundant, hot, warm, cold. The warm site is similar to the hot site, but it does not have the real or near real-time data transfer. Here we would go out to the data center, which is still fully spec'd and smaller, and we would bring our backups to restore the data. We would manually fail over traffic to the warm site, but with the switchover and with the restores, it can take somewhere between 4 and 24 hours, sometimes even more. That really depends on the disaster that happened at our primary site and where we keep our backups. A cold site is similar sized, but again it has the full data center, UPSs, HVACs, internet service providers, generators, but it does not have hardware. For a cold site, we would need to go out and acquire the hardware. We would need to configure it, we would need to load the applications, we would need to restore, basically rebuild everything from scratch. This is obviously the cheapest of the four, but the recovery time can take weeks. I have worked in places where they had hot sites, I have worked in places where they had redundant sites. I don't think I've ever worked anywhere where they have the warm or the cold sites. And I think the major reason for this is it's just not cost effective. You're going to be down for so long, but you still have to keep that infrastructure in place somewhere. What many places use is either a reciprocal agreement, a mobile site, or a cloud solution. A reciprocal agreement is our organization having contact to another organization in the area we do business. We have a rack of 2 in their data center with our equipment. Our equipment is not connected to anything on our network outside of their switches. They have the same in our data center. It is important that they are in the same line of business if you have certain legal requirements you need to fulfill. So when I worked in the bank, we had a reciprocal agreement with another bank in another state. Since they have to live up to the PCI DSS standard just as us, and they were compliant, we were okay to put our things in their data center, and vice versa. This can also at times be, if something happens, yes, you can come house our stuff in our data center, but those are less common because it's kind of just a promise. Sure, we'll take care of it if it happens, but there are no guarantees. If we have a rack of 2 in their data center, powered up, ready to go, real-time copies, this is very similar to a redundant site. We would obviously only house our critical applications there, but we can, if done right, fail our traffic over and be up within an hour. The mobile site is basically a data center on wheels, either in a container or a trailer that can be moved by a truck. It is spec'd like a full data center, heating and air conditioning, fire suppression, physical security, UPS. It may at times also have a generator. Some of them are entirely independent, meaning they have their own generator, they have their own satellite internet. Other types, you might need to drive somewhere and hook them up to power and internet. I haven't seen a lot of those around either because they're just not cost effective, but there are places where they would make sense. More and more commonly now is subscription or cloud sites. This is us paying someone else to either have an MOR spec or full replica of our entire production environment. How much or how little really depends on what's important to us. And then we would have in that agreement that within X amount of hours, it has to be up and running. They either have the systems built and spun up, or they have them built and powered down, and the second we tell them we need them up and running, they power the systems up, apply the latest backups, how fast we're back up, how much we pay, and the specs of the systems really is determined by what is cost effective. Some places you might pay very little just to have the system stored there because they're not using memory or CPU while they're spun down. Other places you might say I want full specs up and running all times, then you obviously pay more. And the places where the systems are powered down are normally pretty inexpensive unless something happens. It might be a few $1,000s a month just to have them sitting there doing nothing. But then if you have to power the systems up, they start using the CPU, they start using the memory, then you pay a premium.